I paid for my sister's education while working 2 jobs. Only to have her call me a loser at a family dinner. She was shocked when I stopped paying her rent. And told everyone why. She could no longer afford her lifestyle. When my younger sister, Lauren, got into the college of her dreams, everyone in the family acted like it was the greatest achievement. My parents were beaming with pride. Lauren was already talking about the career she was going to have. And I stood in the corner, quietly calculating how it would all work out. My parents didn't have the money to pay for her education. Education, they made that when they started dropping hints and clues and family conversations. Lauren is so smart. But college is so expensive these days, my mother would say. And look at me as if I didn't already. Where this was going. I didn't have much. I was working as a mechanic and trying to save up for a house. But Lauren was my sister. And I figured, what's the harm in helping? So I pitched in. At first it was small things, her school books, some groceries. But it didn't stop there. Soon I was paying her rent, her utilities, even her nights out when she needed them. Every time she asked for money, she came up with an excuse. I'll pay you back when I graduate. Or, Mom and Dad just can't help right now. What made it worse was that my parents acted as if I was obliged to help. Family takes care of family, they said, as if I wasn't already. I broke my back working 2 jobs to keep them afloat. Lauren, meanwhile, acted like the world revolved around her. She posted pictures of fancy dinners and weekend trips, smiling like she wasn't living on my dime. I kept telling myself that this was temporary. Once she graduated, it would all be worth it, I thought. But deep down, I was starting to resent the fact that my life was on hold. Was on hold while hers was moving full steam ahead and I was footing the bill. I thought things would get better once Lauren settled into her college routine. I imagined she'd realize how much I was doing for her and show some gratitude. But if anything, her entitlement only grew. The first real sign was her spending habits. While I was biting nails and working late shifts to pay her rent, Lauren flaunted her new wardrobe on social media. Designer handbags, trendy shoes, fancy dinners, things I could never afford. At first I tried to rationalize. Maybe she got a part-time job. Or maybe she was just overdoing it for appearances. But when I asked her about it, she shrugged it off. Everyone at school dresses like that, she said. I don't want to look like I don't fit in. It wasn't just her attitude to money. It was everything. She treated me like a walking cash machine. She never asked how I was or if I needed help. My parents weren't any better. Every time I tried to talk about how much I was struggling, they'd guilt me into keeping quiet. She's your sister, my mother would say. She's building a future. You should be proud to help her. But it wasn't just helping. It was sacrifice. My weekends were gone. My savings were gone. And the house I'd always dreamed of. Forget it. Meanwhile, Lauren couldn't even be bothered to send a thank you note. Instead, she called to complain about her professors, her workload, or her roommates. She never once asked how I managed to juggle 2 jobs, just to keep her afloat. The resentment I had buried began to bubble to the surface. I was tired of being treated like my life didn't matter as long as hers was moving forward. The turning point came when Lauren casually mentioned that she was thinking about studying abroad for a semester. She didn't even ask me if I could afford it. She just assumed that I could. I think it would be such an amazing experience, she said on the phone. Her tone was light and carefree. The program costs a bit more. But it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, right? I sat there gripping the phone, trying to process what she had just said. I could barely keep up with her regular expenses. And now she wanted me to pay for a semester abroad. When I mentioned it to my parents, hoping that they would finally come to their senses, they doubled down. This is an incredible opportunity. My mom said you'll figure it out, you always do. I was devastated. No recognition of how hard I was working. No concern for my welfare. Just the expectation that I'd continue to sacrifice because apparently that was my role in the family. At the same time, Lawrence's behavior became impossible to ignore. She'd call to complain about the most trivial things, like how her roommate had borrowed her shoes, or how the campus cafeteria didn't have real lattes. She also started taking subtle jabs at me. She'd laugh about how she would joke that I was married to my job. She doesn't appreciate you, a colleague said one night when I was venting. During a break, you bend over backwards and she acts like you owe her. For the first time I wondered if they were right. The family dinner was supposed to be a casual get-together. My parents had invited me over to catch up. And Lauren was back in town for a break from school. I didn't want to go, but I figured I could put up with a couple of hours. When I arrived, the atmosphere was already tense. My parents were making a fuss about Lauren, asking about her classes, her social life, and if she needed anything else for school. I sat quietly, waiting for anyone, to ask how I was doing. But of course that never happened. Halfway through dinner, Lauren started talking about the study abroad program again. She went on and on about how amazing it was going to be, and how everyone she knew was doing it. She looked straight at me and said, "I hope you're ready for a little extra work, big brother. These programs don't come cheap." I froze. I couldn't believe it. She had the audacity to say that in front of everyone, like it was a done deal. "Maybe you should get a part-time job," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Lauren laughed at me. "A part-time job? That's funny, I'm too busy with school." That was it. The last straw. I put down my fork and stared at her. "You're joking, right? You think I'm just going to funding your lifestyle forever, while you sit around and do nothing?" The room fell silent. My parents looked at me, as if I had just sworn at the dinner table. Lauren's jaw dropped, but she recovered quickly. "What's your problem?" she snapped. "You've always been so bitter. Just because your life isn't going doesn't mean you have to take it out on me." That hit me like a punch in the gut. After all I'd done for her, sacrificing my time, my money, my dreams, that was how she saw me. A failure. Her words hung in the air like a slap in the face. I could feel my blood boiling. But I wasn't going to let her have the last word. "Bitter," I said. I leaned forward. "You think I'm bitter? Because my life isn't going anywhere, Lauren. My life isn't going anywhere. Because I was too busy trying to find yours." My parents immediately jumped to her defense. "That's inappropriate," my mom's voice said. "You're a brother. It's your job to support her." "My job," I repeated with a bitter laugh. "When did it become my job to work 2 jobs so she could live in luxury? Live in luxury? When did it become my job to sacrifice my future so she can have hers handed to her on a silver platter?" Lauren crossed her arms and rolled her eyes. "Oh. There it is," she muttered. "The martyr routine. That was it." I was done. "You know what?" I said, "Get up. Go ahead and call me a failure, Lauren. But at least I worked for everything I have. What have you done? Nothing. You sit around, spending my money while you pretend to be better than me." I turned to my parents. "And the two of you are no better. You've enabled their selfishness at every turn. And I'm done playing along. I'm not paying for anything anymore. Not their rent, not their school fees, nothing." The silence was deafening. Lauren's face went pale. And for the first time she looked genuinely shocked. "You can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "How am I supposed to live?" "Figure it out," I said, grabbing my jacket. I've been doing this for years. Maybe it's time you learned. I left that dinner with a mixture of anger and relief that for the first time I'd stood up for myself. But I knew there would be repercussions. Sure enough, it didn't take long. The next morning, my phone exploded with texts and calls. First it was Lauren. She started with passive-aggressive messages. "Thanks for ruining dinner. I hope you feel good about it. Leaving your own sister out to dry." When I didn't respond, the gold trips began. "You're really going to leave me like this? After everything I've been through?" I ignored everyone. If she wanted to play the victim, she could do it without me. Then my parents got involved. My mom called first, her tone dripping with disappointment. "I don't know what's got into you." She said Laura needed your help. "She's your sister. She's been my financial responsibility for years." I shot back. "It's time she grew up and took care of herself." My father was no better. He called later that day and said, "You're being selfish. You're punishing her for no reason. What's she going to do now, get a job?" I said bluntly. "Like the rest of us." The rail kicker came. Later that week, when I received a call from Lauren's landlord. Apparently, she told him that I was the one who paid her rent. And when the payment didn't go through, he came straight to me. "She's not my problem anymore." I told him you had to talk to her. That conversation must have been a wake-up call for Lauren. Because a few days later, she turned up at my flat unannounced. She looked disheveled and panicked. A far cry from the confident, entitled person I was used to seeing. "You can't just cut me off," she said as soon as I opened the door. "Yes, I can't," I replied. I leaned against the door frame. Lauren stood there, shifting from foot to foot, like a child caught in a lie. She wasn't used to hearing no from me or anyone else. "You don't understand," she began, her voice rising in desperation. "If you don't help me, I'm going to lose my flat. I can't just move back home. Mom and Dad won't have room for me." "Not my problem," I said flatly. Her jaw dropped. "Not your problem. You're my brother. And for years I've been more than that," I replied. I stepped forward. "I've been your safety net, your bank. Your excuse not to grow up. I worked 2 jobs so you could live your dream. And the one time I asked for respect, you called me a failure. So no, Lauren, it's not my problem anymore." She blinked as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. What she was hearing? "I didn't mean it that way," she stammered. "I was upset, Anne. I just wasn't thinking." "You never think," I shot back. "You never think of anyone but yourself. You use me, you use Mom and Dad. And now you're panicking. Because you finally have to face the consequences." Then she started to cry. Big, dramatic sobs that might have worked on someone else. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. "You're not going to guilt me into changing my mind," I said. "You have to work this out for yourself. Get a job, budget your money. Do whatever it takes, but leave me out of it." She didn't like that answer. "You're cruel." She snapped and wiped away her tears. "You're supposed to help the family. That's what family does." "No," I said, my voice firm. "Families support each other. They don't take advantage of each other. And call it love. And until you figure that out, don't bother coming back here." I shut the door, cutting off the excuse she was about to make. For the first time I felt in control of my life again. After shutting the door on Lauren, I braced myself for the fallout. She wasn't the type to suffer in silence. And I knew she was trying to turn this into a sob story. For our parents. Sure enough, they called me the next day, furious. Mom started with the usual guilt trip. "How could you do that to your sister? She said she was struggling. And you left her when she needed you the most." I didn't hold back. "Struggling? She's been living off my wages for years. while acting like she's the queen of the world. Maybe it's time. She learned what struggling really looks like. Dad chimed in next. He accused me of being heartless and ungrateful for everything they'd done for me. This part made me laugh. Ungrateful, I said. You're kidding, right? I've been funding Lauren's lifestyle, while you two sat back and cheered her on like she was the next big thing. Meanwhile, I've been working my ass off just to keep her comfortable. The more I laid it out, the calmer they became. By the end of the call, they had nothing to say except that I was tearing the family apart. As for Lauren, her breakdown was spectacular. She plastered her social media with vague posts about how some people only care about themselves and about being let down by those closest to you. She even had the audacity to set up a GoFundMe page for her rent, claiming she'd been by an unexpected expense. Her friends commented with concern and asked if there was anything they could do to help, but donations barely trickled in. Apparently, people weren't as eager to support her lifestyle as she'd hoped. Meanwhile, word of the drama spread through the family like wildfire. My aunt called to say she'd heard I was being unreasonable. But after I explained the situation, she quickly changed her mind. She really expected you to continue paying the rent? She asked. Welcome to my world, I replied. After my parents showed up at my door, I realized how far this whole situation had gone. It wasn't just Lauren's entitlement anymore. It was the whole family enabling her, treating her problems as if they were mine to solve. They didn't stop at guilt. My mother began to spread the narrative that I had failed. Lauren and the family. I heard from cousins and relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly chiming in with messages like, "It's not fair to let her struggle," or "Family comes first." But as the days passed, Lauren's facade of control began to crack. I heard from mutual friends that she had moved back home with my parents after being evicted. That wasn't enough for her, of course. She made it clear that she expected to be coddled there, too. A friend told me that she'd overheard Lauren complaining about the food at home. "She's angry that her parents don't cook her real meals," said my friend, laughing. She even joked that they should hire someone to take care of her, since you're not around to do it anymore. Hearing this only cemented my decision to cut ties. If my family wanted to enable her behavior, that was their choice. But I wasn't going to keep burning myself out for someone who couldn't even basic gratitude. Lauren's downward spiral continued. She moved back in with my parents, who spoiled her like a helpless child. They enabled her every whim, using what little savings they had left to support her lifestyle. Meanwhile, they doubled down on blaming me for her situation, acting as if I had committed some heinous crime by cutting her off. I heard from relatives that Lauren was still spreading lies about me, telling anyone who would listen that I had abandoned her at a difficult time. She conveniently left out the part where she'd been leeched off me for years, while flaunting her privilege as if it were her birthright. But her downfall wasn't just financial, it was social. Word of her GoFundMe scam spread, and the same friends who once joined her for fancy dinners now avoided her phone calls without me picking up the tab. She had nothing to offer them. The turning point was when my parents called me in a panic. Apparently, Lauren had run up a credit card debt in their name. She had maxed out the limit to pay for a shopping spree. They begged me to help. They claimed they couldn't make the payments on their own. I couldn't help but laugh. After all I had done to defend them, to enable them slandering me, they had the audacity to come crawling back. This is their mess to clean up, I told them firmly. They chose to support them. You chose to ignore their behavior. And now you have to deal with the consequences. For once they didn't argue. Maybe they finally realized that I wasn't going to swoop in and save her, as I had done so many times before. That was the last I heard of either of them. I moved on with my life, concentrating on building my future, without their constant drama weighing me down. It took years to repair the damage they'd done, but I was the stronger for it. As for Lauren, last I heard, she was still living with my parents, stuck in the same cycle of demands and excuses. Part of me felt sorry for them, stuck in their selfishness. But mostly I felt relieved. They had made their bed and now they could lie in it.